Check.
Sexton trying to get loose. He'll fire. Hey! Knocks it down. Carl slammed it home. Garland upstairs. Oh! Sexton inside. A thunderous dunk. And Allen blocked the shot at the rim.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs Media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The NBA playoffs have begun, and what a start it has been. It has been incredibly exciting, and the one thought on everybody's mind is, hey, if you had to hand out awards to the 22-win Cleveland Cavaliers, which ones would you hand out? We will do that on today's episode. We're going to be handing out Defensive Player of the Year, Most Improved, Best Performance in a leading role, in a supporting role, all that good stuff. And with me today to do that is my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
Well, I realized I had my headphones way too loud for that intro. I just blew my freaking ears out. So you hate to see that.
Well, finally, you're listening to me. That's something that we needed to work on.
Barely, one could argue, because I am ringing right now. But yeah, I'm feeling good. Playoffs have been awesome so far. I've actually gotten a chance to watch some of it, which, unlike a lot of the regular season, ha ha ha, am I right, Cavs fans? But, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Play-in was awesome. Playoffs have been awesome so far. I really only think there's like one series I don't care about.
Yeah, it's Honestly, I'm not that excited for Utah Memphis. It does get a little interesting with Mitchell out for game one. I kind of like the John Morant arrival. That's fun. Dylan Brooks brings that Canadian flavor. Before we get into these Cavs awards, I do actually want to talk a little bit of the play-in and playoffs. I know that was kind of primarily our focus of our last podcast, but we can talk a little bit of that at the beginning. I think the play-in was a massive hit.
Yeah.
I've seen a few people kind of say, well, Steph got knocked out, so it's not great.
Well, yeah, that's stupid people.
It is stupid people. It's just so funny to me that when for so long the argument has been, hey, the playoffs are a little too predictable. We need a little more parity. We need the randomness that comes with the NFL or NCAA tournament. And then when you have an up and coming star in John Morant knock off Steph Curry, you have people say, oh, this was a failure. We wanted what seems familiar. We wanted what was predictable.
Yeah, I have a hard time giving a damn about what any of those people think, because I don't think they're good faith arguments, man. I don't think they're the kind of arguments that come from people who actually really like basketball a lot. You know, it's funny when you look at a 1-game play-in or a 2-game play-in, these single elimination basketball, basically, and there is probably not a great competitive case for it, right? You know, we know that the best of 7 series is the best way to litigate basketball, and you know we would never ever do like a single elimination finals. But I work in the competitive space in esports, and we have a competitive operations team and their whole job is to build tournament formats and products, right, that have a maximum excitement and fairness, you know, best competitive integrity possible. And it's funny, I always kind of joke with them because we spend all this time trying to think about what the most equitable format is, the format that's best for players. And then March Madness is the most popular tournament in the planet, you know, right, which is single elimination, the least fair, the least, the least rewarding to the better team. And we love it. So ultimately, it's funny because I don't think anyone designing basketball, I don't think James Naismith was thinking about watchability when he was coming up with the game. He was just trying to find a fun game. But the NBA, I think people need to understand that the NBA does have two kind of parties to please here, which is the competitive integrity side of things, but then also the fun side of things. And even if the play-in isn't the best for competitive integrity, it's so good for fun and meaningful basketball, and kind of it's almost like an entree to the playoffs in terms of kind of getting the viewers ready for that level of basketball. I loved it. And, you know, even if you're going to get more of the Eastern Conference play-ins, which weren't as thrilling, with the exception of Tatum's 50-point game. But, you know, even if you end up with more Wizards-Pacers than you maybe wanted originally, like, the moments where it is great are so fun.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we have crowds back in some capacity is also knocking this up to another gear. Like, hearing the reaction of a live audience makes such a big difference when you've had empty gyms for the majority of this season, or a smaller crowds that don't really have the same impact. And I almost feel like the play-in tournament is the inverse of what we've talked about with the lottery odds, where we think the lottery odds are stupid, even though it probably is going to benefit the Cavs compared to the old system. Like, as much as there's still the opportunity for the Cavs to fall further than they would have in the old system, the opportunity as the 4th best team to jump up is better than it has been in the past. We think it's stupid, even though it's going to benefit the Cavs, whereas this play-in could really come back to hurt the Cavs. Like, if they have next season, if things go as I've kind of predicted, as I've been looking into my crystal ball, and this is a 7 or 8 seed, there's a decent chance that you lose 2 games and all of a sudden the record states that the Cavs didn't make the playoffs, even though they had a productive season. With that in mind, I still think that this is a good format. I think that this is really exciting. Your observation that it's an entree to the playoffs, I think is really accurate, because I think it kind of gets everybody into that mindset. There's a difference from regular season basketball. And I just love the fact that, yeah, it kind of sucks to be put in this position where you're in the play-in tournament. So go out and get 6. Go out and get a top 6 seed. The seeding matters more than ever now. Go up and be aggressive. I think that's such a good incentive for teams that are in that middle to take the next step, to really push to be better.
And as far as I'm concerned, man, and I said this on the last spot, I really do believe that playoff contention is a top 6. I think 12 teams make the playoffs now. And I know a lot. That's probably, I think some might find that to be an irritatingly charitable take, but that's how I feel. If I'm the Dallas Mavericks in the 5, 6, 7 spot, I'm freaking out because I'm trying to make sure I duck that play-in.
Yeah.
So, to me, I think it was a massive success. And the playoffs themselves have been really, really fun so far. Like, what's the game you want to talk about first? Because the Lakers, not looking good, my friend.
Yeah, Lakers Suns is obviously fresh in the memory. I felt sick, and I still feel a little sick about Chris Paul hurting his arm. I really hope that he's going to be okay because I love seeing the Suns back in playoff basketball. Like that is something that takes me back to like my formative years watching the NBA and falling in love with it with those Steve Nash Suns. That was my pre-Twitter team from the West that I always rooted for. And yeah, it's great to see them playing well. Aiden absolutely manhandling Anthony Davis is really fun. It's not the bubble anymore, buddy.
Oh, man.
Mikal Bridges played great. Devin Booker arrived on the playoff stage. Like it's so much fun, and I just love how open the field is.
Don't you feel like Devin Booker's one of those examples where like there's always this push and pull between NBA Twitter and players on who to evaluate. Like, it feels like Devin Booker is one everyone needed to trust the players on. 3 years ago, they're like, this kid's bananas good. And we're like, yeah, but the metrics. And I just I think we just should have trusted him. Because, like, he was a tailor-made playoff player, and it really, really showed in this game.
Yeah, and he's one of those players where the high water marks, as I like to say, were always really impressive. Like he could do some really next level stuff. He could elevate over guys. Like his really explosive games were always at such a high level that you would figure as he continues to improve in the margins and round out his game, he's going to be able to do that more and more consistently. And he's able to find that gear that not a lot of guys are. I just love kind of how open it's been though. Like to me, it's really fun to see Luka Doncic go off against the Clippers and them have no answer for him, even though they're a team with Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Patrick Beverly, who they tried throwing all three of them on him.
Ty, come on, Ty. Don't put Pat Beverly on Luka Doncic. That's disrespectful at this stage.
He's too small. He's too
small. And honestly, like, doesn't it like bother you that they don't start with George or Kawhi on them? Like that bothers me, man. Like, Come on, this is not the series nor the player to like kind of half-ass it if you have an elite defensive option. And it's not like, if it were just Kawhi or just Paul George, and they had to exclusively carry the load on offense, okay, sure. But like the fact that you got both of them and neither of them are ready to take that assignment by default, it just seems like I don't know, that just bugs me. That bugs the basketball purist in me. Like I get why LeBron wasn't taking top assignments and hasn't for some time. Like it just feels worse here.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Marcus Morris or Pat Beverly, like come on, those dudes are food. And it's not like they're bad defenders, but you're dealing with a super duper star here.
Yeah, it really feels like, and I expect them to make some adjustments. Ty's typically good at that stuff.
Can we pivot all over the place? Because I do want to ask you about the Lakers Suns before we move off it all the way.
Yeah, no, let's go all over the place. I don't want to spend too much of the podcast on this, but I definitely have a lot to talk about here.
So, are we worried about the Lakers?
Yes.
Yeah. I think we are. I think I am too. And I think that going into last playoffs, I couldn't believe the certainty in them. Because I thought this is a team full of like they're kind of like Boston, where they're full of theoretical shooters, but no one that like absolutely petrifies you. And then they just made all their shots. Yeah, and
Anthony Davis just hit absolutely everything from three. Rondo,
I believe he was
Rondo did it again.
Yeah, I believe he was 20% above his career average from mid range and from 3-pointer. So something in that neighborhood. Mason Ginsberg has the tweet. I've retweeted it 30 times where he talks about just what an outlier AD's postseason was. So it's like if the jumpers aren't there, then the spacing is really, really borked. And I don't think that they're, and I thought that at least I liked the Schroeder pickup because I'm like, I didn't trust the shooting from last year. I'm still furious at JR for saying the 2020 Lakers were better than the 2016 Cavaliers. How dare you, JR Smith? But like, I thought, okay, all these weak points like are going to show up in a non-bubble environment where everyone can shoot the hell out of the ball. So I like the idea of like add some pick and roll players that can do some other stuff. But if the spacing's not there, I just don't know what they're supposed to do offensively.
Well, Carter, Talen Horton-Tucker is going to be good in about 5 years. So when he's good in 5 years, people will be laughing at the takes that they needed a Kyle Lowry, that they needed to make a move. This was always my thing with the Lakers. Like, especially LeBron re-injuring himself. Like, he's someone that's always needed a bit of a ramp up. Even in the bubble when he had time off, he needed a ramp up. And the fact that the Clippers, I'm going to endorse them throwing those games down the stretch to avoid the Lakers because one of them was the Thunder, and I think that might work out to our benefit.
Yeah.
But the fact that they didn't want to play them right away is insane to me. Like, this is exactly what we were talking about. LeBron looks good.
Well, in fairness, you know what they're betting? They're betting on the Suns doing their work for them.
Oh, yeah, that's
fairness,
fair.
But they're going to have to get out of their own first-round series. I don't know, man.
But if the Lakers were fully healthy, Lakers could have been the Western Conference Finals. There's a very decent chance that was the way that it was going to play out. And to me, like, you want to knock off the Lakers as early as possible. Like, you want to get at them early. I don't think the series is necessarily over. No. I think it's going to go the distance. But how shaky they look is kind of proof of my point that you probably want to play them earlier in the playoffs to have your best shot at upsetting them.
Yeah, it's time to get rid of Andre Drummond in the rotation. It's time for me to eat my crow as well, because I thought, hell, I maybe just believed in LeBron a little too much to get somebody to work hard. But, I mean, both their bigs. I mean, AD and Drummond, flat foot city in game one. Like, so many challenges with them sitting on their heels. And it's like, you can't do that with two elite mid-range finishers in CP3 and Booker. Like, you have to be up and challenging them. And they have the size to recover, too. So I don't think this is, maybe they would say I had to protect the rim. I don't buy it. I didn't see active feet. And on defense against this Suns team, you're going to need it. And I don't know, man. But Drummond is just, I mean, they need some IQ on the floor. And honestly, it's Carter, time to unearth Marc Gasol.
What it is Frank Vogel and LeBron just can't get the same production out of Andre Drummond that JB Bickerstaff can. Like,
well, it does stand to reason.
The best Drummond we saw was in Cleveland. So maybe that's what it comes down to. I just love that this feels like a little bit of a passing of the torch playoffs. Like, it really feels like this young crop of talent that the league has kind of built up is taking that next step. They're stepping up, whether it be Luka, whether it be Devin Booker, John Morant knocking
Chris
off
Paul.
Steph Curry. Yeah, Chris Paul,
that young whippersnapper.
That little whippersnapper, Jimmy Butler, like all these guys are just stepping up in exciting ways. Drew Holiday, all these guys you never heard of. I just feel like this is a really good showing for the youth of today's NBA, and that has me excited. But we can pivot now. We can, unless you have anything else to add about the playoffs. Let's get into some of our awards.
I have one joke that's not really a joke.
Okay.
If Chris Middleton scored 50 points a game, I still think I'd go, hey, he's pretty good.
Ty Windish is going to come jumping down your throat.
I don't know what it is about that man, but I just am not. Maybe it's just people trying to tell me that he's an all-star too emphatically, but something about me just goes, it's just not all the way there. It's not quite as good as you want him to be, as they need him to be.
Chris Middleton,
he was awesome.
He's good enough to be a number 2. Drew's good enough to be a number 3. We'll see if Giannis is good enough to be a number 1.
He ain't yet. I'm not writing it off.
Looking that way.
I just don't think
looking that way.
Why can't he get He needs an 8-footer. That's all the man needs to become the most unstoppable player on the planet. Screw the 3-pointers. Screw the off-the-dribble 18-footer. Just an 8-footer. When they put a 7'2" dude 2 inches from the rim, he needs to be 6 feet away from the rim and just push a little floater in.
No, he needs 12 seconds to shoot an 8-footer. That's all it is.
Come on, man. You can do this, Giannis. You can do it. I'm rooting for you.
Oh, boy. Giannis, he's still young. He's got plenty of time to improve.
Just turned 26. We know nobody wins a title before 26.
I thought this year might be a little different. I thought he had another gear. I'm skeptical, but I'd love to see him prove me wrong. But he's got plenty of time to improve, just as these young Cavs have plenty of time to improve. And let's start things off with our year-end awards. We're doing a little bit of an NBA Oscars type hybrid awards type thing. Call them the Cavsies. Call them whatever you want. Most improved player, Carter. Who do you have for this season?
Well, not you, given that you called them the Cavsies. I gotta say for this one, it's got to be Darius. And I know there's some people who are anti second year players getting such honors, but he just really, in my opinion, took the jump from being guy who makes good looking plays, but the numbers don't reflect it, to the numbers starting to reflect it. And I thought he did the work in the offseason to get his body in a place to be able to kind of absorb more of the rigors of the season. And again, he just changed his shot diet. He got smarter with how he played in the second half of the year. So to me, I don't really know if there's much competition. Sexton got better, but more on the margins. Okoro is a child and doesn't qualify as a rook.
Yeah.
And honestly, I wish I'd seen some more big improvements from the fringes of the roster. I just didn't see it. So I would say Darius.
Yeah, it really feels like, and we were talking about this offline, but it feels like the Cavs got about best case scenario with all of the core four. Maybe the exception being Jarrett Allen with the concussion, which took a little while to bounce back from.
The way the season ended for Jarrett leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth, I think.
Just a little bit, but you actually, and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but it made me think. You know how the Cavs have had so many guys that have come back from concussions, and it's clear it takes weeks for them to get all the way sharp. It gives me a little more appreciation for Kevin Love in the 2016 finals, because when we did our rewatch, he was so good in game one, and coming back from that concussion, it's very understandable why he was not himself in that series. And I think him not being himself doesn't get discussed enough there.
I mean, we talked about it when we did our City of Champions pod, where we rewatched every game. I mean, he was out on his feet for half that series.
Yeah, it's a really tough thing to overcome. It would be really funny to give a most improved player to a rookie. I don't think that would happen. You mentioned Okoro as you're listing guys off. I will give Sexton credit for this, because
it's between those two, right? It's between Sexland.
Yeah, it really
actually
is.
You know who actually deserves consideration. I feel silly for not including it. Your boy Dean Wade.
Oh, Dean Wade's a great one, actually.
Because Dean was a guy that I felt okay, he's not not to be a jerk or anything, but he's just a guy, an end of bench filler that's going to spend a couple years mostly in the G League, might play 5 minutes a game in mop up duty. And then we saw the G League numbers and we're like, oh, he's an archetype that is not bad. He can shoot volume threes while playing as a legitimate four. And in a lot of ways, I think he helped save their season when they were in that downward spiral, and he started getting minutes at the four. The only reason I don't know if he's a most improved is because we don't really know what he had last season. He didn't get a real chance to show it. But, I mean, just year over year in terms of impact, I think he definitely deserves to be mentioned, even if Garland's the pick.
Yeah, I mean, both Dean Wade and Darius Garland were guys that you didn't think belonged in the NBA last year. So
you are the worst, man.
I really am. He is a really good honorable mention because I think at this point, he's kind of proven himself as he's a rotation player. I think he's someone that you can factor in a little bit. He's not a cornerstone piece that you build around. I will give Sexton credit for this, because his first two seasons, the first half of those years or first third of those years were ugly. This is the first time he's really put together a complete season. And he did have that stretch where the 3-point shot kind of left him after he was dealing with a hamstring injury. But even then, he was scoring efficiently and he was still productive. So the fact that he put together such a complete year, I think is noteworthy and needs to be brought up. But I do think that the clear pick is Darius Garland. The fact that he has gone from somebody that like when they were doing redrafts last year, he wasn't showing up in the top 15. And now he's pretty firmly, like, if you're doing one of those, he's top 4, top 5 at worst. And he's established himself as kind of the consensus when you hear people talk about the Cavs. He's the top prospect. He's that top guy, the guy that has the potential to be a foundational piece for them. So I do think that Garland deserves a lot of credit for that.
Would you say that if he was, being redrafted out of the top 15, that maybe the rest of the league might not have viewed him as being worth a lottery pick, Ziggy? Anyway.
Oh my God, you're bringing that back up.
Just kidding.
Look
Zig.
at you go, man.
I'm being annoying. Anyway, no, he was awesome and very much cemented himself as the number one piece in the rebuild by, I think, a healthy margin.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree.
And when you kind of get a sense of how the people are starting to talk about him, that he is the ceiling raiser. He's the reason they take the next step. And obviously, I still think they're looking for their number one. But if he keeps growing at this trajectory, I think Cavs fans should be thrilled.
Yeah, I think there's, for me, if I'm projecting him out, I kind of view him as the number 2, and that's really good. Like, I think the Cavs have multiple guys that are capable of being number 2. Garland's just the one that I'm most confident in his ability to fit with just about anybody. Like, I think that that's a really valuable trait. The way that he plays on and off ball, the way he's improved defensively this year. I think most of his shortcomings on defense have to do with size and strength and kind of physical maturity, more so than effort or basketball IQ. He seems to be pretty locked in on that end of the floor. Even though the results aren't quite there, they still were a better defensive team when he was on the floor versus off. But while we're talking about defense, let's go with Defensive Player of the Year. And to me, there's 2 candidates here. I guess actually 3. You got Isaac Okoro, who has had such difficult matchups throughout the season, but I think top 5 in terms of like opponents guarded, in terms of quality. You got Larry Nance Jr., who was exceptional for the time that he was in there, but only played 35 games and was probably healthy for about 20 of them. And then Jared Allen, who made a real big impact at times, but as we mentioned, after the concussion, things weren't as sharp. Which direction do you lean, Carter?
I think you're just kind of choosing. This is almost like the Larry Bird thing, where you're kind of trying to figure out peak over longevity here. And yeah. I'm a big like peak guy. And to that end, it's Larry Nance for me. Like, obviously, you could argue that his lack of availability really hurt the team, and I wouldn't fight you too hard on that. But the only time the Cavs played legitimately good defense this season, like legitimately like bothered offenses, was when Larry Nance was on the floor. So to that end, like, Isaac's got the pieces to be a really, really great perimeter defender, especially against smaller guards. Jarrett, I think, has all the potential in the world as a rim protector, but neither of them raised the Cavs' floor or their ceiling quite like Larry did, and for that reason, he's my pick.
He's my pick as well. This is one of those,
which tells you that the Cavs did not have the best year, that we're picking a guy who played 35 games.
No, absolutely. And the thing that you didn't mention there that I think stands out when you watch Nance on the defensive end is just the communication. Like, he is such a floor racer because he's telling everybody where to be. He's calling out defensive coverages. He's pointing things out to guys. And he's one of those coaches on the floor. And as you mentioned, like, when he was out there, especially early in the year, it was a top 10 defense. And I don't necessarily think they are a top 10 defense. I don't think that would have sustained for the full season, even if he was healthy, but they would have been at least average, which they were up until May. They had an average defense. So I think it would have been better. I think Nance was the biggest difference maker for the Cavs this season. We can get into how you weigh that when we talk MVP of this team. But on the defensive end, I just think Nance's consistency and the way that he made everybody else better and kind of raised that compete level on that end of the floor, to me, that makes him kind of the clear candidate.
Yeah, he's the quarterback of the defense. And I think that he kind of deserves the shout out. Now, if they had him for 82 games, it just makes you wonder, like, what kind of impact he would have had. Maybe it would have tailed off. Who knows? But, when he was out there, I felt him the most. And
their lottery odds wouldn't have been as good.
Yeah, I would agree.
I feel very confident
ultimately,
saying that.
And not to be Captain Name Drop here, but Larry actually said this to me direct. He said, Kevin's the quarterback of the offense, and I'm the quarterback of the defense. And I really think that is very accurate. And this was very early in the year. This was when we were getting him on the pod for the preview. And I think that very much still holds true. You know, that's where the IQ on the team resides on either end of the ball. Now, Darius took a leap in a major way to being that QB of the offense, and I think at this stage of the season, I would probably say he probably is the QB in a lot of ways. But
I think the torch has passed. That
but
was
we
be
do see but I do think we see Kevin kind of lift it a little bit.
I think he does. I think that is just the value of having that secondary playmaker alongside Garland. I think it adds another level to the offense. But I do think that there was a passing of the torch, and Darius kind of took that. Now, the next award is interesting. So I said that we should come up with our best performance in a supporting role. So to me this means that they were not the best player in this individual game, but they were a key part of this game. So I never really set ground rules on how to interpret this or how we were going to approach it. So I'm really curious to see where you went with this.
I'd like you to make your pick first so I can think just a little bit longer.
Okay. So I have an award winner and I have 3 runner-ups. My award winner is Larry Nance versus Memphis, where he went 7-7 from the floor, 18 points, 4 assists, 3 steals, and plus 13, the game without Sexland. It was one of the ugliest games of the year, but it was such a fun win to get. And it was in that stretch where this team was getting absolutely wrecked by injuries. There's constant turnover, and the fact that they were able to put together such a great defensive performance, one of his better performances overall, and he was struggling with his shot a little bit going into this game and had that 7-of-7 performance. And it was just so much fun because it was a game that I think I saw the most kind of appreciation for Nance on the timeline outside of Cast Twitter. Like I think that's when some heads were turning about the difference he was making with this team.
Well, I misinterpreted your goal for this award, so I was thinking it's like best role player. So
see, I still think that was kind of a role player performance, but I do have some.
I didn't pick out a bunch of box scores.
Okay.
So swing and a miss here for our planning. But I like
it though. I like when things get weird.
But I actually did immediately find a game that popped into mind as you started talking while you were filling. Dean Wade, 16 points and 4 made threes against the Toronto Raptors in a game that was really, really important in March, where it was like the season hadn't quite slipped away yet, and Dean just came out and just started firing, and it was like, oh, this is a guy who can actually start, scoring in volume for this team. He's not just a guy who we can fill minutes with. And yeah, so that was a performance that immediately popped into my head, and I was like, I got to go find that game in his game log.
Yeah, see, I thought it would be fun to look back at some of these performances and remember the good times.
It would have been nice for you to mention it.
Yeah,
in pre-pro that was the idea.
You know what? It probably would have been a good idea, but you know what? I'm not the best leader. Yeah, well, I might be.
You have your days. You have your days where it's great, and you have your days where it's not so great.
But I also like making you look bad, so that's good. So just keep in mind that that's also going to be the idea with the best performance in an individual role.
Well, that one's easy.
Yeah, that one's fairly easy. Some honorable mentions I have for the supporting role award: Isaiah Hartenstein versus the Spurs.
Yeah, I was just looking through the Hartenstein game log.
Hardy against the Spurs was awesome. 16 points, 12 boards, 3 assists. Played a big role in that win, where obviously Garland was the star in that performance with his career high. The other one that jumped out to me was Lamar Stevens against the Hawks.
Yeah,
he only played
that was
15...
where I was going next. You're killing me.
You're welcome. You are absolutely welcome. Plus 12 in 15 minutes and a 2-point win, game-winning dunks, 8 points, 2 steals, 2 assists. Lamar Stevens was another one of those really great stories.
Can I give you one that was a real joy in the moment that, now has been a little hampered by injury, but Windler going 5 of 5 from 3 against Atlanta.
Oh, man.
That felt so good. And a 1-point win, too. So those were all really, really, really important shots. And that was like, oh, it's happening. He's figuring it out. And then, unfortunately, started slumping really hard, got hurt, ended up out for the season. But like, if there is a blueprint for Dylan Windler, it is the 3-game stretch on the 23rd, 24th, and 27th of February where he went. Actually, I'm sorry, just the 23rd and 24th. He ended up going 0-4. I misread. Point is, he went 9 of 9 over 2 straight games from 3, and it was like, oh, here he is. Here's the sharpshooter that we were promised.
Yeah, man, it was such a tough season for Windler. Not as tough as the year before, but not the best. It's funny because
Super Sandwich in the chat. A great call up for a guy who had a very rough season in Jetty Osman, who his 25 points against the Nets.
Oh, yeah. That was big.
And I think that was the first game of the Big Three era on the first half of that back-to-back with them. But, wow, yeah, that was an awesome game. And that's why you don't all the way want to write off Jetty, because he'll have games like that where you go, oh, man, everything's looking really, really good. Obviously, he had the season from hell. All the percentages collapsed well below his career lows. And I really hope that he proves to be one of those aberrations of a weird year, where he had a little too much put on him, and then the play style got messy and just everything kind of unraveled for him. But he did have some legitimate moments, especially early in the season when they were down all their guards, and Jetty was the only one who could even dribble the ball. But yeah, that was a great moment against the Nets. I love that call out from Super Sandwich.
Yeah, Jetty had some good games. Like even that Memphis one that I talked about, like that was a good performance from him without guards. Like it really does seem when you look at this year, he was at his best when he had the ball in his hands, which, yeah, that's a way to optimize Jetty, but it's probably not the best way to optimize a team unless he's doing that with the second unit, because role players typically don't get to handle the ball that much, and he's going to have to find a way to find that balance. But I agree with you. I don't know if he's going to be back next year, but wherever he is, I wouldn't be surprised if Jetty had a bounce back year. And Windler, I just want to touch on him just for a second as we're reminiscing about this season. It really is tough because I felt like in February and even in January, he was doing some nice things on the floor. Like I think we were happy with him. He was shooting the ball pretty well. March, he got banged up and was kind of playing through an injury and things fell apart. Durability is going to be the biggest thing with him. But I do think that we saw glimpses of him being a good role player. Now, you're looking back, we mentioned redrafts before. I think it's pretty safe to say almost everybody would rather have Keldon Johnson at this point. But you know what? While I'm not banking on Windler being part of the rotation moving forward, it wouldn't surprise me. Like I saw enough basketball IQ and kind of little things. I think the shooting's good. It's just going to be whether or not he can get healthy and stay healthy. Like that's the biggest question.
I totally agree. And ultimately the jumper's if it's going to work for him, the jumper's going to have to be good. Everything else is nice, but like you want the defensive IQ, the playmaking, the smart cuts to be the cherry on top, not the main dish.
Yeah.
And the shooting wasn't there enough this season, and and obviously the health wasn't there. So I'm rooting for him. I'm really hoping he can get healthy, get right, get that jumper going, because the pieces are there for him to be a productive shooter, but the numbers just didn't fit the bill.
Yeah, and this is one of those guys that might be in a bit of a roster squeeze. Like I think if they're drafting another forward or a guy that's going to play on the wing next season, it's going to get tricky for him.
And by the way, that's happened to the Cavs before. Hi, Joe Harris. So sometimes guys get squeezed out even on teams that aren't great and then find their place elsewhere. Hi, Danny Green. And it happens, it's not working for them there. They find a new location. Remember, Joe Harris was out of the league.
Yeah. Danny Green is another one where Danny Green was cut by the Spurs after he was cut by the Cavs.
Yes.
They picked him back up.
And I remember I used to work with a guy named Tim Doyle at my old network, and he was a former Northwestern player, and he played in like a charity run with Joe Harris after he had gotten hurt in Orlando, and I was like, oh man, it's really not going to work out for him, is it? It worked out pretty well for him. So it just, you never know. Sometimes guys gotta move. So even if he does get squeezed out, I don't think that means his career is done. Nor would I think it means the Cavs are like terrible for not making it work. sometimes life just lines up wrong in certain spots. I mean, look at poor Gordon Hayward in Boston.
Oh my God.
You know, like him being really good in Charlotte this year has nothing to do with how he did in Boston, and you know, circumstances align in a certain way. But I am very much rooting for him to figure out in Cleveland, because they really need that kind of archetype of player. There's a reason our dear friends over at Locked On Cavs want to throw the bag at Duncan Robinson.
Ugh.
I know, I hate it, but the point is, you know,
I'd rather. Hey, I actually have a take there. I'd rather pay McBuckets. I'd rather pay McDermott, because I think bang for buck, you could probably get him for like the MLE versus like 20 million a year.
I completely agree, but let's not tangent too hard. Point is, Windler is who they want that kind of guy to be. So I'm very much rooting for it, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you look at it, like he was healthy in college. He's someone that fit the archetype of a player that you want to have. And one of my takes has always been late in the first round or in the second round. I like taking 4-year guys out of college that you feel can be a good rotation player, because you're going to get really good value. Like the bang for buck, if they hit and they are able to contribute in a rotation, is just so high that I think that it's a good way to go, rather than taking massive swings at guys that are just ridiculously raw. But we got to keep things moving here with the best performance by an individual this season. Carter, there's a pretty obvious one here, right?
Yeah, it would be Colin Sexton against the Nets. 42 points in an overtime win, scoring the last 20 points for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Luckily, this one did not require you to communicate much with me, because I knew it right away. I mean, there's no other choice, correct?
Part of me almost wanted
you
to
want
go
to give him against the Spurs. You want to give it to Garland against the Spurs.
I almost wanted to do that, and then I did some soul searching, and I was sitting there and I was like, is this because it proved me right in some ways? That more people swung to that direction? Am I that self-involved that I'm going to let my bias get in the way of just objective analysis? And then the answer was yes. Yes, I was absolutely about to do that. But then Then I went the other direction, because Colin Sexton doing that against the Nets was so huge. Obviously, the national spotlight was there. The first game for the Big Three in Brooklyn, hitting the shot over Kyrie.
Oh, the shot over Kyrie, and then the shot. Oh, man. It was such a fun game.
And also just how much emotions had swung that week is something that I thought about as well, because you started things off with the Jared Allen trade within 7 days of there. Then you had the Kevin Porter Jr. locker room situation. It was clear. I can't remember if they had traded him yet at that point, but that reporting was out there at the time. And for Sexton to go out there and do that was just, okay, you know what? Things might be all right. You know, we have this guy that is performing at an all-star level this year, that is stepping up against some of the biggest stars. That was just such a great game. About it.
We're playing the highlights on, if you're watching live on YouTube. I forgot about the tip in on the air ball.
He was so special down the stretch. Like that's the thing that really stands out, is the number of clutch plays and the ways that he really elevated his game. I remember Isaac Okoro was phenomenal in that game as well. Like you got some really good role players.
He was all over Harden, like white on rice, man.
Nance was great. Jared Allen was really good in the minutes that he had in that game as well off the bench. Like
that shot on Kyrie was so amazing. And it was like, I knew it was cash too, which is weird because he's not a great pull-up shooter.
Mm-hmm.
At least an organic one with dudes all over him. And man, he was just so insane in that game.
Oh man, that's a game we're always going to look back fondly. Like that's one of those games. It reminds me of like Kyrie against the Thunder way back. Like those ones that really stood out.
God, I remember that Kyrie Thunder game so clear. I remember he had an absurd finish over Ibaka. Like, yeah,
it's special stuff, man. Like it's really special stuff. Like
you know, maybe this rebuild isn't going anywhere, and you know the unhappy folks that don't like the direction of the team, maybe they're right. Who knows? You know, this stuff is hard, but like you watch games like this and you go, like, garbage teams don't get this kind of fun stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm. Nah, yeah, absolutely.
There were so many more. Even if the season ended up worse, you know, win-loss wise from last season or close, like the highs of this season were just so much higher.
It really was, and it gives me that glimpse of hope, because I really do think like if this team was more healthy, they would have been in that mix for the play-in. And we've talked about how teams needed lucky breaks in team building. And usually when those lucky breaks happen, it's something that's apparent in hindsight, but maybe not apparent in real time. Like when Steph got hurt and then he signed that value contract, you would think, okay, this guy that you're banking on with a high lottery pick, he's might not pan out. Monte Ellis versus Steph. Golden State tried trading Steph and Clay for Chris Paul. Like there were so many things at the time that weren't working out for them, and then it ended up panning out. I really do think if they get some lottery luck, if they're healthy, if they retool the roster, things could be turning around in a very, very short period of time. And it's performances like this that give me hope. Like we've really kind of gone into the minutia when it comes to Sexton of trying to value him. What do you pay him? Like all those conversations. And when you're doing that, it's easy to get away from the emotion of basketball and forget about kind of what he brings from an entertainment value. So I think that it's valuable to look back at moments like that and remember just how much fun it was in real time.
Yeah, it was a great moment. And it was the first time since Decision 2.0 that I felt like the people were excited about the Cavs. You know what I mean? And like that's just fun. You kind of forget, like you forget how fun it is to have people like ask you, like, "Oh, what's happening over there?" You know what I mean? Like and kind of chatting with friends or even coworkers, things like that, and outside of the NBA Twitter sphere. You know, the Cavs being nationally relevant for the right reasons is very, very fun. And I can't wait for it to be the case again soon.
Me too. And I've seen a few people talk about, are they going to do panic shortcut moves? And I really want to hear that quantified of what a shortcut move is. Like, is trading for Jared Allen a shortcut move? No, that fits the core. Like I think if you're adding any talent like 25 or younger, that's not a shortcut. That is guys that can help contribute now. And I really think like you're going to be adding a top 10 pick this year. You're already got guys that you're really invested in that you believe can be something. This has to start turning around. Like there has to be a sense of urgency that these guys need to start playing winning basketball, because you see like the growth becomes exponential once they're in those situations. And I do think that they're like I really do think that they're on the verge of it. So I'm hopeful going into this offseason, but I'm also nervous as hell because I know how important it's going to be. Carter, the one award left, MVP. Who do you got?
For the MVP of the 2020-2021 NBA season for the Cleveland Cavaliers, it's Colin Sexton, man. I think that I think it's weird where Darius very clearly established himself as the future of the team, but the consistency that Colin brings to me, like if I just like on a night-to-night basis, it's like, who can I count on? I always can count on Colin for pretty much the same performance every night. And I wouldn't, if your pick was Garland, I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But like, to me, it was just like, this is the guy that like was just, he was more available in my opinion, and more consistent throughout the full year. I want to give him credit for, as you mentioned, his first year where he actually didn't have that terrible start to the year, where he was efficient from the beginning, and how he figured out how to stay efficient even when the jumper left him mid-season. I think it was just a very, very exciting year if you're a Colin Sexton fan. And I think it's a weird spot where you probably don't want him to be your MVP. You want Darius to play so well every game that he just becomes that guy. But I think, between injury concerns and, I think Darius got better throughout the year. I don't think Darius started the year nearly as good as he ended it. And to that end, if we're evaluating the full year, it's Colin Sexton for me, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I think the most impactful player was Larry Nance. Like, if he played more, I'd probably give the award to him, but he didn't. So you kind of have to deal with that reality. I think your points about Sexton are really good. I do think that the reliability that he brought to the table was great. Like, he was consistently there. You knew what you were getting from him on a night-to-night basis. It's the making everyone else around him better that makes me go Garland, because he was at a different level this season. Like the playmaking was really, really good. He missed a lot of those opportunities. Like, there was creation that wasn't being reflected in the box score early in the year, especially when especially when he was passing to Andre Drummond. Did you see my stat that I tweeted out? Because I tweeted that I felt like Drummond had cost Garland 3 assists a game. Did you see that tweet?
No, I did not see that.
So I then looked at it on kind of what the stats were, how many assists Garland averaged per 100 possessions with Drummond on the floor versus Allen. It was 2.1 more with Allen. It was 9.1 assists, or 9.6 assists per 100 possessions with Allen on the floor. Like, just looking at the impact stats, like you look across the board, no matter what it is, some of them I don't value as much. Like what 538 puts out, I don't necessarily value it. But when it tells me one thing, when on-off numbers tell me one thing, when my eye test tells me something else, like I just value the ability to make everybody else better. And it just, to me, as much as I think Sexton is the more reliable scorer, he's the more reliable guy when you need to get those points, when you know what you're getting on a night-to-night basis. Garland just was such a connecting piece, and he made everybody else better, that to me, he was my pick. Now, this is obviously marinated in my bias, in me being such a big Garland believer and him kind of living up to the expectations that I set for this season. But that's kind of my rationale, but I would not fault anybody if they said Sexton. I know I'm going to get some pushback on Twitter.
I don't think you will. I don't think you will. I think Cavs fans are much more enamored with Garland than they are with Sexton at this stage. And, I think Garland's...
My guy Hiram's going to mention something.
Oh, yeah. Bless up, Hiram. We're happy to hear from you whenever. But, yeah, I mean, Garland, I think the Spurs game really was, in a lot of ways, the culmination. It was exactly what we wanted to see from him. All in one tidy package. The fact that the playmaking doesn't get worse when the scoring goes up. The fact that the 3-point volume has guys scrambling and diving at him to try to get him to run him off the line. It was exactly what you want to see. I feel like it was a good microcosm for the second half of his year before he got hurt. And I'm very, very excited to see what he's going to bring to this team next year, because I think next year should be... I'm hopeful, at least, that next year is the star turn, where everyone else realizes that this is, a top guard in the league as opposed to a promising guard in the league.
Yeah, you look at April, 15 games of 21.5 points, 7.3 assists, and a true shooting percentage of almost 59. Like, that is really legitimate. And that was in some of the most important games of the season. Now, they didn't win them all. And he kind of had a couple moments where he had turnovers late in games and stuff like that. He was exceptional in those moments earlier in the season. And I think the clutch numbers for him, someone had tweeted out basically the field goal percentage in the last 4 seconds of the shot clock kind of thing. And he was at the top. Like, he is one of the best finishers in that situation. His handle's able to create space. And he's just understanding the game at a higher and higher level. And if that becomes what he does next season, like we talked about it with Sexton last year, like I believe it was like 23 games after the Clarkson trade that he was putting up those stats. Well, if those 15 games from Garland, when he's basically 21-7, maybe 21-8, if that's who he is as a baseline next season and he's building off of that.
I was about to say, if you're Darius, that's your new standard, bud. Like, That's what we're expecting from you next season. And if that is what we're going to get, then I think this team's going to win a lot more games.
Yeah. And if they're competitive, if they're in the top 8 when All-Star comes around and people are looking at those stats of who's the most impactful guy on the Cavs, we should probably give them a guy because it's their hometown team. I'm just saying, it could be Garland. There's a really good chance. It could absolutely be Sexton. Like,
who's more likely?
Oh man,
I think it's Sexton.
I'm going to say I think it's Garland.
I think Garland will deserve it more, but I think Sexton's more likely, if that makes sense. I don't know. Coaches pick that. It's going to be a reserve. Coaches are going to pick. It's going to be Garland if it's either.
Here's a take. I think it's more likely to be Sexton if they fall in the lottery. I think if they draft higher in the lottery and it's someone like a Jalen Green or a Cade, I think Garland, there's going to be a redistribution of who touches the ball, and I still think Garland's going to be the primary initiator.
That's a good point.
I just think it's going to take some volume away from Sexton. Now, he might make up
Scotty
for it.
Barnes, Sexton's going to score just as much as he always has.
Exactly. And at that point, if he takes another step up, like let's say it's 26, 27 points per game, and he's still bringing these 4.5 assists, yeah, it's going to be pretty tough for Sexton not to get in, but we'll see. I mean, that is putting the cart way ahead of the horse.
Sure
but
is.
it's exciting
Let's
to
win
think
some
about.
games, boys. Come on.
Absolutely. The key is they need to win games before any recognition is going to come. I'm not going to get upset about where people rank the young core and whatnot, because they need to prove things. And that's not going to happen until they start winning some games. Anything else you want to say before we wrap this thing up, Carter?
It was a hard year. It was a hard year for everyone. But as I said, I think if you just look at the numbers, you might be worried that the Cavs are not on the way up. But again, I can't help but feel more optimistic than I did at the end of last season. And I think it's because of the moments like the Spurs game, like the Nets games, that these big, loud statement moments for the young players on this team. And I'm very, very excited for next season.
I am too. I mean, look at last year. Like, we were feeling good about Sexton's year-end stretch, but you had one half of the season where he was not very good, where he had taken a step back, and then he was great. You look at it now. Now you're feeling confident about Garland. You're feeling confident about Sexton. Jared Allen, you feel great about. Isaac Okoro really stepped up. Like, you've really gone from one guy that you feel pretty good about, but was still divisive, to a core four that people around the league actually credit. Like, they think that it's good, and there's the opportunity to add to it in this draft. So this is probably the most important offseason we have had in a very, 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 very long time. I'm really excited for it. Carter?
Yeah, I think the org knows it too, and so it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of see how this plays out, and ultimately cross your fingers for some lotto luck, gang, because it matters more than you wish it would.
Yep, and we will be podcasting Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be going live again on YouTube. At that point, the coin flip for the tiebreaker between the Oklahoma City Thunder will have occurred.
Doesn't actually matter much.
It doesn't matter tons, but it is still interesting, so we'll at least have that information. I'm really excited for Tuesday's pod. We got a really special guest for that one, so keep your guys' eyes peeled for that. Because we are doing a bit of a season wrap-up, I think it's only appropriate that we get some thank yous in here. Obviously, massive thank you to all our listeners. You guys, your support has been amazing. The way that you've shared our content, interacted with us, all that has meant a lot. Massive thanks to the Cavs org as well. Like, the fact that we've been doing this for a few months and they've really empowered us. Like, they've given us the freedom to continue to get our takes off, and really, like, just the trust in us to do what we do. Like, we had I forget who it was in our Discord, but they mentioned that they were a little nervous that the podcast was going to change with this changeover, and the fact that we've been able to continue to do the same show is just it's so rewarding. Like, that's what was promised, but the fact that they've delivered on that has been really, really great.
Yeah, I mean, no notes really. And I think
just
that,
add in enthusiasm with that yawn.
Well, I'm sleepy, man. It's been a long couple weeks for you, boy. Yeah, I mean, not a ton of the team has been very, very hands off with us, especially editorially. I mean, all the hands on is really just help, getting us, the kind of support we need to help promote the pod. So, I think people would be forgiven for expecting a lot of hands-on. Honestly, I was expecting it, and that just even with them coming in with the best of intentions of not overly managing us. Corporations are not built to let two idiots ramble about them on public forums, on their own public forums, for 2 hours a week. And the fact that they've let us kind of cook is really awesome, and I really appreciate the entire leadership team there. At the Cavs.
Absolutely. I really appreciate
here
that.
At
really
the Cavs. We're part of the team, baby.
Yeah, us. We can. Let's see where we land in the draft lottery. Let's figure that out. Thank you so much to all our listeners. You guys really are amazing. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe, because it's the best way to help us show up in the algorithms. If you're listening via podcast, make sure you leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, and resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of the Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, you can send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there, and until next time, go Cavs.